I want to throw a broad question to the panel because we've already, our stories are so important to us. We're in the business of making stories, but we also have our own stories of our own lives that we're navigating through. We have families, we have loved ones, we have people who care for us and people that are in our care. We've already heard some stories of tragedy. Maybe it's a good idea to share some stories of success where you witness someone making the right choice or standing up, or whether you had an opportunity to take a situation that was developing maybe in the wrong direction and make it safer for the benefit of yourself, your crew, or the people working for you. Just anyone who wants to take that. Come on, there have to be some success stories. I know that Tracy has some. Go ahead.
Were you going?
No, I said I already did mine.
Okay, last January I got contacted to do a music video, which is really not what I do, but seeing as though I am in Nashville, I got contacted to do a music video for an artist named Tucker Bethard, whose dad is apparently a big music guy here in town. And he's a young kid, and his label was paying for him to do his country music video for his new single, and it involved motorcycle riding, being launched out of a shopping cart into a pool, shooting each other with paintball guns, doing donuts and golf carts, a lot of stuff. So the insurance company called me up to speak to me about what I thought was safe and what was not safe, and we agreed that certain things like doing donuts in a golf cart was not safe, shooting bottle rockets at each other was not safe, everything else we could probably work around or cheat with a camera. So they got the go-ahead to shoot this video, and we did the paintball sequences, we did the launch out of the supermarket cart into the pool, and then it came time for him and his buddies to ride these little motorcycles around this parking lot, just having a good old time. And then it was to culminate into a stunt being the motorcycle being jumped off of a ramp that I had built into a mattress, and I was going to do that stunt myself. During the day, I noticed that in between shots that him and his buddies who were in the video would disappear, and then it would take a while, as usual, for the talent to come out of their buses or trailers. And I noticed that they were getting pretty cocky. So when I was gearing them up for the shot, which was taking place on them just riding their little motorcycles around, I noticed they smelled like alcohol. I wasn't sure about it, but immediately sent up a red flag to me. I turned around and I looked over there at Video Village where they had their chairs, and I noticed there was a bottle of booze just sitting there. And I had known that this is kind of the way things are done on country music videos. Not all of them, but some of them, that it's just a big party. So I went up to the producer and I told the producer that I think these guys are drinking and I want to go on with this next shot. So he called their manager over from the label, and I told her that I think these guys have been drinking. And she said, well, I don't think he has. And I said, well, what makes you think that? And she goes, just because I don't think he would. I said, well, let's call him over here and ask him. And she refused to do that. So I went over to talk to the director, and the director said that the artist wants to do his own stunt now, jump in the bike.
I'm sure he wasn't drinking.
I said, so you guys want to, and I got the manager over, the producer that hired me, and the director, and I said, you guys are going to let this young artist, he's like 20 years old, you're going to sit in front of that jury, and you're going to say, was there a stunt coordinator on the set? Yep. Was your client drinking? Yep. Did the insurance company approve him jumping this motorcycle? Yeah. And you guys still want to do it? Well, he's the talent and the record label. I said, you know what? I said, fuck you guys. I'm out of here if you want to continue with this. So they all stood around, they had a big meeting, they said, well, he's insisting on doing the jump. I walked off the set. I took my toys and I went home. About a month later, you can look this up, Rolling Stone did an article on him releasing this single, and in it, it specifically says that he was doing all this wild and crazy stuff, and since he's such a cool dude, that the hired professional stuntman bolted from the set, and Tucker did his own stunts. So here's somebody, I've been doing this my 29th year of being in the stunt business, and here's somebody that's 20 years old, and just because they're afraid to stand up to a 20-year-old, they insisted on letting him do the stunt. Whether he did it or not, I don't know, I didn't see it. The point is that whether I have all this time in the business or it was my first day as a stunt coordinator, I made the decision that something bad was going to happen. I needed everybody on set to know that was going to happen, the people that were important. And none of those people were capable of making the right decision by saying, no, we can't do this. And that needs to be everybody on the crew, just not someone in the stunt department, grips, catering, crafty, camera, whatever it is. Somebody needs to step up and do this.
You know, I really appreciate that we can make this an annual event, or maybe we can think of safety as a monthly event. One question I want to ask is, you know, I've been around I think a couple ADs that specifically come to mind who make safety, they set the tone at the beginning of almost every shoot day, whether it's a set meeting or something. How can we make safety a daily focus, whether it's at the beginning of the day or something that we look at the end?
Well, I mean, just to address that, I mean, you are supposed to have a safety meeting at the start of every day. I know having done a lot of...
But can people take that for granted? Do people forget to do that?
No, absolutely. I was going to say, I did a lot of episodic television, so when you're, let's say, on the set of Chicago Hope and you're in the same hospital room for the 100th time, it does get laborious, and sometimes the meetings get really brief. It's like, anybody have any concerns? We're back in the hospital. You know, and so, you know, and I can be guilty of that too. I mean, the same crew every single day. But I think, you know, to answer your question, yeah, it just needs to be in everybody's consciousness, whether it's, you know, notes on call sheets that are attached, either safety bulletins or just a reminder even that's on there saying what's going on today, and, you know, everybody please be aware. Or just, you know, sometimes just trying to find a way to bring it to people's attention, even if you don't have anything specific to say, even if you just make a joke about it, because in the sense of, you know, we're here every single day, you know, just to bring people's attention to it, make sure that they're aware, yeah, it should be on your mind as we go through the day. But I agree with you, I think it does get sometimes pushed to the side. Yeah.
Anyone else? And how do you work among departments too? Do you find yourself in sets where there is a lot of siloing between departments, or are you encouraging each other to work, you know, for the grips to work with the camera department?
Well, I think that's the goal of the safety meeting, is so that every department head can be present at the same time and talk about or ask about their particular department's role in that day's activities. And unfortunately, a lot of the sets that I've worked on personally, at the end of the week, they send out the production reports for us to write down, you know, match our time cards. And at the bottom of every day's production report says safety meeting held at call, but there weren't. And the production is required to hold these safety meetings, but they don't bother to do it, and they said they did it anyway. And they're missing a great opportunity for all crew members to have an opportunity to find out what everybody else's plan is for the day. And if there is any siloing, that each department can say, well, okay, that's fine for you to do that, and that's going to work for you, but that's going to affect my department this other way. It's not just great for safety, but it also, I think, helps a lot with efficiency and speed. So that's, it's important to have those meetings, and it's a great loss to skip them. And if you're on a show that they are supposed to hold safety meetings, hold them to it, and say to the AD, how come this didn't happen today, or and because not everybody knows what the AD knows.
And Richard is an AD?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a certain amount of that. At the same time, and I think it's really important, that, as you said, to set the tone at the beginning, so that when a group is new and they're just getting to know each other at the very start of production, that's when I think it's most important. And as you move along, I think most crews do come together, and people start, just forming a closer bond and relationships. But again, you rely on people sort of passing information along, not just disseminating it from, let's say, my position or the producers on down, but also coming the other direction to hear from the different departments about any concerns they have. And sometimes that is the message. It's like anybody's aware of anything, please bring it to the attention of the ADs. I know on large sets, sometimes you do have to have separate meetings, like the extras will be gathered together, just from a practical point of view. And they'll have a separate meeting with, say, the second AD. Because frankly, you're trying to bring everybody to the set, for instance. I mean, a lot of times it'll be over the radio as well. It's like, okay, all the ADs, pull your headsets out, open your radio, we're gonna have a quick safety meeting, and so at least you feel like you're reaching as many people as possible at the same time. So that's one of the ways it's addressed sometimes.
For independent filmmakers or crews who aren't accustomed to working together, or say it's a 48-hour film festival shoot and people are kind of unfamiliar with each other, whose responsibility does bringing things up, who does that fall on?
Everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I think it does come back to everyone. I mean, hopefully there's a time for a production meeting, so that's one of the places you can start that process. So in the production meeting, you're going to outline anything where you have some safety issues and hear from different departments. And so you put that, you log that in the back of your brain if there's some particular issue that's come up that hasn't fully been addressed. But that's a good place to start the process as well.
And even if you're doing low budget or independent filmmaking, no matter how small it is, the safety bulletins that are created by contract services, which are an industry standard, are available for free. Basically, there's several phone apps. The IATSC has one. Cinematographers Guild has one. I think they're free apps, and in them you can read every one of the safety bulletins, and there's dozens of them, and they're all to specific environmental concerns, or working around animals, or insert cars, or there's working at heights. There's a ton of these, and it's worth familiarizing yourself. And if you are leading a group in a small film, there's no reason not to read these for yourself or to distribute them amongst your crew, particularly if they have not seen them. And then as to who's responsible, in all the safety training that's offered across the industry, there's always this thing about who is responsible. Is it the first AD? Sometimes people say the key grip or the producer. There's people you can go to at the studio. But what it really boils down to is you are responsible for your own safety. And if you go to the AD or the grip, or you call the studio safety hotline, which I've done, and nobody will help you, you're the one who has to go home at the end of the day. You're the one who has to be able to work for the rest of your career. You've got to make the decision, this is not a safe thing and I'm not going to do it. And in order to make that decision, you need to be aware of what the hazards are, and that's generally going to require some form of training beyond what you just absorb working every day. And that may be a 2-hour safety class that you can take online. That could be the OSHA 10 industry standard class, or it could be a much more expansive thing. But if you don't know what the hazards are, you won't be able to identify them, and you can't protect yourself from them. So I think that's a really critical thing, is to learn that for yourself through whatever means.
Some hazards are obvious, or some risks, are easy to conjure up in your mind. Obviously, you're doing a big gag with a car wreck. Some are more subtle. Let's talk about some of the subtle things that you may have seen on set that come up in your mind that you might not think about as dangerous, but become a kind of insidious risk because of that very fact.
Well, I think working around traffic is probably the one that comes to mind all the time, because everybody gets to a location, they just think they think they're on a film set, meaning that, this is my world, it's not the real world. And I can't tell you how many times there've been, filming on sidewalks or streets where crews just walk across back and forth, with heavy equipment, not paying attention to either getting to the crosswalk or whether there's a red light or not. Most union shoots you're going to have, you're still going to have police with you, and I don't know what the permitting process is like in Nashville, whether you have to have police if you're working in and around a street. So that gives you a little bit of buffer. But I think that's one of the, always hypervigilant whenever I'm in that situation, because invariably people constantly doing that and not being aware of traffic. So it's subtle, but it's a real hazard. Yeah.
Well, and there's some misunderstood hazards, and getting back to the Sarah Jones incident, people believe, and I think a lot of people on that set believed that, that this can be a safe place to work and that they wouldn't be taken someplace that wasn't safe. They believed the producers and the location manager who addressed them, and people need to know these things for themselves. And in this particular instance, we had a railroad safety class here a few years ago, and one of the important lessons was there are no abandoned railroad tracks. There is no shooting on railroad tracks without a representative from the railroad present. So if any of those things are not present, it's being done illicitly and dangerously. Well, I've been in this business a long time. I had no idea that was true, and there's a lot of stuff like that there's just no way of knowing that yourself until somebody comes along and teaches you this is not how this is supposed to work.
I also think about the really small things like taping cables down and that sort of thing, or not leaving a case in a traffic area. Fatigue is not just driving home, right, Tracy?
True. I was going to say lift gates. I feel, I always try to watch out for PAs, or in my department, like a utility or a loader is usually a newer person. I try to watch out for people that I know have not been on sets a lot, or maybe have not, or moving from like student film sets to like bigger sets, because they are the ones that are not going to know about these dangers. And I think lift gates are dangerous. Even when you know what you're doing on a lift gate, it can be dangerous. That's definitely something, you get ready to work the lift gate and the new kid wants to jump in and help. And it's like, no, don't touch that. But you have to be aware of that, just because they've seen people working the lift gate, maybe they don't really know how to work it. So before you're putting something on the gate, why don't we practice and we'll see how this works and do that. If it's a lower budget, we're trying to transfer. But,
And I mentioned, thank you, and I mentioned fatigue when I pointed to you not because you look fatigued or anything. I'll dig my way out of this, I promise. You gave me a really good way of thinking about set safety, which I wanted to, bring up, which is the idea that if you're on a 12 or 14-hour day, you're not practicing safe habits at the beginning of the day for that person at the beginning of the day. You're setting up safe habits through the day because of how you're going to feel after 14 or 15 hours when your judgment isn't as sharp and your reflexes aren't as fast and your willingness to stand up for yourself as everyone's rushing to go home might not be as strong. Is that anything you want to add to that or put legs on that?
Mark, I don't remember telling you that, but if you say that I did, I will.
You did.
You were fatigued. You were very fatigued when you said it, yes.
It was fall of 2016 when we were talking to the cinematography class.
In the cinematography class. Okay, well, I went in kind of talking as a director. So it was one of those things. I'm going to say then, because when I came to your class, I talked about directing and shooting, not so much ACing. So when they were probably asking me about prepping, and I say I always try to prep as much as possible and plan out for all the scenarios, because you never know what's going to happen once you get on the set and things change. And, I kind of keep everything on like note cards when I don't lose them. And I try to refer back to that, like what was my original plan and how, and try to work through that, because by the time you get to the end of the day, you just want to get through and you're not thinking as clear. So yeah, that does go to prepping, but kind of protect you from yourself. I mean, the stupidest example of that is that I try to pack hair ties like all over my bags and stuff, because my right now self is not going to think about wanting one later. So I try to do the same thing with all of my stuff. What can I do ahead of time to save myself from myself later when I don't, when I'm running out the door and I haven't prepared that?
I'd tell you another subtle thing that comes up all the time is when you're working outside in the heat, is people getting dehydrated. I've seen a number of people collapse on sets because they weren't drinking water. So that's something I try to remember as you tell the PAs, just bring some water around and start passing out. Because there's certain people who never get away, like camera crew never gets away to sort of, even to grab a drink sometimes. And they're out there the whole day in the beating sun, and it can happen, it creep up on you. So.
Not even necessarily outside. I'll share this story on myself. I was doing a Steadicam job that was a live multicam thing, and I was strapped up in the rig, and I was indoors. I was hydrating, so I thought I was drinking. The director had rehearsed certain shots, but when we went live, they decided they wanted to use me also for the human tripod for the audience reaction shots. And so I was literally locked in position, waiting for them to take me for, hours at a time. And when I never got the breaks I was supposed to. And at one point I said, I just need to sit down. And I sat down. I took off the vest. I took off the arm and the sled, loosened up my vest. All of my blood flowed back into my body that had been restricted, and I passed out sitting in my chair. And I was trying to take care of myself, and yet it wasn't enough. Lesson learned.
Well, even with the water, though, you're almost in more danger and when it's not hot, because you don't feel as dehydrated.
Right.
When it's hot, you're maybe thinking about it more. So I try to follow the hydration thing all the time, because it's really easy, even in the winter, to not drink enough, because you don't feel as hot, you don't feel like you're needing to hydrate.
Another thing to think about is it seems like on a lot of these big features that they do, they would rather pay meal penalties to the whole crew than break you to have something to drink, have something to eat. And I know you've all been on a set where you show up in the morning and you don't get a chance to eat because you're running to set up for this first shot, or the director wants you to walk over and talk about it. And that's something to think about too, that you might not get a chance, not only to get something to drink, but to go to the bathroom or get something to eat. And that seems to be happening quite a bit lately.
Joyce, maybe you can answer this. In an industry where it seems like it can be kind of like the wild, wild west sometimes, is there a way that there can be more awareness of specific standards? How can people be aware of those standards, or what standards should we be going after? Not all sets are union sets, right? Most sets I work on are not union sets. And oftentimes there's no meal penalty at all, Even if you missed a meal, there's really no consequence for it, other than maybe complaining or something like that. How do we move towards awareness of standards and holding to those standards?
I think it all begins with education, getting education on different things that can occur on sets, trainings, just learning about everything that you're going to be faced with, So, and then as far as certain standards, we all should have standards when we go to work. We should all expect to do a good job. We should all expect to look out for ourselves, to make sure that things are done safely. I feel like it all begins with yourself, and then you help each other.
Yeah, obviously there are a lot more protections built into union contracts, but I think it's not a bad place to go. The reason I think a lot of things are non-union is because of the cost factor, but being safe is not always a cost factor, in other words. So you can look to those guidelines that are in those bulletins and to those common practices on on union shoots, let's say, and try to bring those into the non-union world as a set of safe practices. And they're not necessarily going to cost the company any more money. The other thing I could suggest would be to have a meeting between the production staff or the AD or somebody and an appointee from the crew. A lot of times the key grip is sort of represents the crew. and certain things. I know whenever there's a vote, it seems like you go to the key grip and, can you poll the crew and see if this is okay? So maybe there's a meeting of the minds between that person and the AD to say, hey, what are the standards here? What are the guidelines? What are we going to be, what can we expect with things like that? Are we going to break in 6 hours, or we need to break in 6 hours from here?
And I'll just point out, when we talk about union versus non-union, you know, the union contracts having to do with meal penalty and breaks are actually give the producer more flexibility than what state and federal law does. If it weren't for the union contract, they'd be required in Tennessee to let you eat after 6 hours. There are no meal penalties without a union show, but that doesn't mean they cannot feed you. That means they're in violation of wage and hour laws if they're not feeding you. That means you're entitled to overtime even if it's not in your contract. Those are state law and federal law standards. So these things are in place on shows that are not under contract, and you should be aware of them and you should follow them. And the other thing I want to point out about union versus non-union while I'm on the topic is that when you're on a union show, there's generally health insurance, there's generally workers' comp, there's all these things that are enforced by the union local involved. But when you're doing your independent work or your own work, you need to be very careful about this idea of making sure you have insurance of your own, health insurance, that if you hire people to work for you, even if you're paying them minimum wage, that they're your employees and therefore you provide them with workers' comp insurance. Because if somebody gets hurt on one of those shows, they don't have a big organization to help them. They've got you and they've got themselves, and you need to go into those kind of projects with the idea that people need protection. And if you are a person working on one of those shows, you want to be treated as an employee, whether under contract or not, because you want workers' comp insurance and you want their liability insurance to cover you. And you don't want to be an independent contractor who basically, if you get injured, you're on your own and may never be able to work again, and there's no compensation for that.